Well, this is the Encounter Faith Podcast. My name is Ross, and I get to host these conversations. And today I get to talk to Ryan Hammer, which means I got to talk to the guy who books this podcast. But Ryan, welcome.
What up, Ross?
It's great to have you back. We're going to talk about something that was sort of spearheaded from you in the idea phase, but it's a series that is coming up at Good Shepherd for those of you who attend here regularly. But I wanted to talk about it beforehand because I really like the mental framework of what it sets up. Mm-hmm. So in real time, folks who are listening, they probably heard Pastor Greg last week set the table, but I want to get this from you as well. We're doing a series called Throwback. Why are we doing this series? What's the goal of a series like this?
Yeah, so Throwback is a 4-week series that we've designed to really take a look back at the history of the church over the last few decades, culturally, where, what the main issues were, what people were dealing with, what issues people were facing, because they have shaped where we are now.
Sure.
We build upon these shared experiences and the movement of our past to become kind of where we are right now and use that as a springboard to continue to move forward. I was doing a deeper study on Psalm 136, and Psalm 136 talks about, well, honestly, it happens so many times throughout the scriptures, especially obviously in the Torah, the Old Testament, but reminding ourselves of the way God has moved in the past.
Sure.
Right? So constantly looking back, the Israelites constantly would go back and tell the story of how God rescued them from Egypt, how he's provided for them in the wilderness. So it's kind of one of those series to kind of do that, to look back and say, okay, what are some of the ways God was moving within the church and culture, and how does that shape where we move forward?
That's great. We're going to dive specifically into one of these decades here in a second, but one of the curiosities I have in hearing you describe that is we started this series in the 80s. Now, for lots of people who listen, that's such a throwback. They weren't even around. Mm-hmm. But for probably maybe half, if not most of the people, oh my gosh, no, weirdly enough, their faith began long time before the 80s. Mm-hmm. What is significant about we'll say the more recent church history that feels like this is where the right way to map out a 4-week series? Because obviously we could spend 52 weeks going over all of church history, and that's what seminary is.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think, for our purposes of this series, we just decided to kind of take a look at the last 4 decades per se, so starting in the 80s and going to the 90s, to the 2000s, and then to the 2010s. And here we are in the 2020s. But that was just kind of the logical way to look back and know that even kind of the more seasoned, wise people within our church have recollections of the 80s. Those might have been the formative years for their faith, or the years that they were raising a family, and they had young kids, or they were just trying to strike out on their own and be more independent. So, I reminded of Pastor Glenn. I was talking with Pastor Glenn about it, former pastor of Good Shepherd-Naperville, one of the associate pastors. And he said it vividly. I remember when December 31st, 1979 transitioned to January 1st, 1980. He's like, I was in the middle of, the sea on an aircraft carrier in the Navy.
Right.
Like, he's vividly able to look back and say, okay, these were the years that, again, shaped a whole lot of where we were able to experience Glenn and Glenn's faith and how he poured into our church. So I think that's just a vital piece of understanding kind of where we've been.
I like it a lot because I think it's helpful, and it's something that I think a lot of us are not well practiced in, is looking at what this macro story is so we can find out where our own story is a part of it.
Sure.
And I think what it looks like to engage with folks who are not in the faith today, what it looks like to be able to be a credible witness requires having the ability to do some of this work that we're describing. You are talking about the 2000s here as people are listening to this in real time. I believe, if my calendar is correct, you'll be talking about this in like 3 or 4 weeks in real time.
Yeah.
But
knowing what I will say,
knowing what you will say, because obviously nothing's going to change between now and then. One of the things that stands out to me about you as a person is you are someone who's leading in a context that you have always been at. You were a kid coming to Good Shepherd, and now you are technically an adult, but you are emotionally still about a child.
Aren't we all?
Yeah, no, for sure no. We aren't.
Okay.
But that's why you and I work so well together.
Yeah,
the 2000s specifically. You described it as hope in an age of fear. Mm-hmm. When you do some of that looking back that you're describing, I'm curious what moments you have similar to what Glenn described from 79 to 80.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yes. So I have done a little bit of thinking through some of this stuff as well too. Like, and it's just dawned on me now. I did some of that process that Glenn did as well too, because I can vividly, I was born in 1982, which is like God's year. And so a lot of my formative years were in the 90s. Like, so man, I can look back to the 90s and be like, you know, what was the church like then? Seeker sensitive, you know, and some of that transition obviously into the 2000s, but that was a big, deep formative piece for me and my faith, and being involved actually literally here at Good Shepherd,
right?
Since I was in 7th grade, which would have been the early 90s, I think, and getting involved in the music program and, you know, being a part of services that way. And I can vividly remember December 31st, 1999, and driving around Naperville with my friends as midnight hit and became January 1st, 2000. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if people remember this, especially, you know, whatever, those that might not have been born yet. That was a terrifying moment for all of the world.
Yeah.
Because computers, people were concerned of Y2K.
My favorite part about having to tell a conspiracy theory like this is the longer you describe it, the more just the less credible you sound. We'll put it that way.
Well, yeah, I do sound like a nutcase, but like I vividly remember that. Like, oh my gosh.
The concern was planes were going to fall out of sky.
Yes.
Banking systems were going to collapse.
Computers were going to completely reset and everything will be lost. So I vividly remember that, right? And that was my senior year of high school. And then I go away to college, that August, in August 2000. And a year later, beginning of my second year of college at the University of Iowa, the morning of September 11th, I'll never forget what I was still sleeping, and I got a phone call from a friend and saying, "Oh my gosh, turn on the TV. You'll never believe it. The world is ending." That's what they said. The world is ending. And wow, what that did to shape the rest of that decade. Mm-hmm. And that's where the tagline, hope in an age of fear, comes from. Main scripture, that can drive some of that stuff is Psalm 46, verse 1, which says, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Mm. So just reminding ourselves of this culture of fear and this uncertainty within the world that breeds fear. Mm-hmm. Where is our foundation? Where is our solid rock? Where does our hope come from?
Yeah.
God is our refuge in times of trouble.
I remember describing this to my dad one day because he was having we'll call it an old man moment, asking about why younger folks weren't more engaged in civic life. And then one of the points I made to him was like, I grew up with a different America than you did. Mm-hmm. You grew up in an America that was formed by victories in World War II. I grew up in an America that was formed by 9/11.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that you described the sort of insecurity that bred fear, because one of the main takeaways from my perspective from that time was it took something that felt certain in the world, America standing in the world, safety, etc., and made it all of a sudden feel incredibly uncertain.
Yeah.
And we're still living in the wake of that. Like that is a September 10th and before is a different time period than September 12th and beyond. Mm-hmm. What I'm curious about and how it connects to the church is we hope we live in an age. We hope that we as a local church are able to help lead in conversation, able to help lead in influence, able to help lead in impact. But often we wind up being in a position where we are having to respond, sometimes necessarily so, to culture or world events around us. But sometimes the church winds up losing that leading position and wind up having to react. I'm curious, because you were literally here, what was church like in the 2000s? How did Good Shepherd try to lead in this, as you describe it, age of fear?
Yeah. Well, I specifically remember I wasn't here at that exact moment, again being out of town, but I still had all the connections with the church, and I knew that when September 11th was happening, a huge piece of the staff, all of the staff that was here that specific morning, gathered in the sanctuary and held hands around the altar, and just spent time in deep prayer, praying for God's wisdom and discernment on how to move forward. So when I re-engaged with the Good Shepherd community, like on a more regular basis, roughly in 2003, when I transitioned to going to school in the city, and was living back at home, re-entering the community here at Good Shepherd was a different world that we were ministering to.
Sure.
And so, of course, direction of ministry and focus of ministries had to change and adapt to reach and to speak to where people were entering those moments as it was. I think one of the biggest things we did, and one of the coolest things we did, was trying to address how to best cast a wider net that people might hear the good news, the hope that does exist amidst fear. And at that time, our contemporary service at 11 a.m. in the sanctuary was jam-packed. I mean, people were sitting in the aisles. We were striking a chord, metaphorically and physically, literally. Wow. You see what I did there?
I did.
And wow. So we embarked on one of the kind of biggest changes of the church, which was establishing a new alternative community to worship service, to speak to a lot more of the current world context. And that was the 11/11 service, launched in October of 2005. So just 4 years or so after 9/11, and discerning the right way to go, and that's what emerged.
I like that you made that connection, because it's one of the things that stands out to me about this place, which is finding ways to meet people where they're at and finding ways to minister in a way that folks are ready to hear. Mm-hmm. I love the fact that we as Good Shepherd, to pat ourselves in the back for a second, like, are able to continue to provide choices for people. At that time, you had multiple different choices that each had a little bit of a different flair in our sanctuary. And one service in response to the community birthed an entire new pillar of the church.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a great example of what a church at this time does in trying to, like you said, provide that hope and provide some of that connection. Because one of the other things that happens during this time is 2007, the iPhone comes out, and that's another fulcrum point that happens during these 2000s. I'm curious what ways, and this probably goes into the 2010s a little bit, but what ways have you seen in your ministry life the influence of our digital lives leading to disconnection rather than what you were experiencing when you were starting, which was a community ready to be more connected?
Well, we're still like the ever evolving ways of trying to reach people. Here we are 20 years later after the launch of that alternative service, and we're still asking ourselves the same questions. How do we reach people where they're at? How do we, So when it comes to digital media, and I was a proud owner of the iPhone 3. Wasn't it the 3 that they started with, or did it start with 1? I don't know.
I was 16.
Yeah, you were too young. But I had an iPhone 3 and it was dope. So it was just, it was fascinating.
Oh gosh.
I was so excited. Anyways, it was fascinating to literally at that moment have a computer in your pocket.
Yeah.
Like you could bring it everywhere with you and do within your fingertips. And again, revolutionized how culture responds in situations and shape and how it shaped culture. So the church needed to change with that. And that was another inflection point on how to be a more digital presence. Church websites, ways that you could reach people digitally. And now here we are in the age of, short attention spans, 15-minute attention spans or whatever, mainly due to the effect of the TikToks,
nice,
and the Reels and all those things. So how, as a church, do you still minister to the ever-changing digital presence?
Yeah, those are the kind of questions that you were trying to begin to answer during this time. One of the other kind of common narratives and ways that the church moved forward, the Big C Church, similar to how Good Shepherd moved forward with the launch of Contemporary, is I think there was some churches who were able to see the level in which what we were doing was incomplete.
Mm-hmm.
One of the biggest examples we saw that in was with missions. Missions work became more focused on international stuff being led by national citizens, like from the grassroots up.
Yep.
And a recognition of how we were building a church, or we had a table that didn't have the right people sitting at it.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm curious about for you, especially as you look back, the term social justice now, I think, can evoke some emotional responses in people. But what were the ways in which you saw the impact that Good Shepherd was making that felt like we were living into our fuller potential?
So decades, the preceding decades, and it still manifests today, but perhaps it began where we're starting this series in the 80s. There became a real deep sense of individualism and individual success and individual achievements. And that only deepened the more and more the decades moved along. And so we find ourselves in the mid 2000s still in a very self-centered, self-focused landscape. And all this individualism in terms of how does society revolve around me, or how does culture revolve around me? And certainly that found its way within the church. And we still, it's still a battle we're fighting culturally and within the church as well too, where we get so self-focused on our faith and rather than a communal faith, this faith that what is the sermon didn't speak to me. Well, guess what? The sermon wasn't about you.
Right.
Like it was,
I didn't like your set list, Ryan.
Yeah. It's like, okay, well it's because it wasn't, designed to worship you. It was designed to work, and so this personal preference thing always comes into play. So when it comes to justice and social justice and missions and looking outside of ourselves, well, for some, that's just not a very natural response.
Right.
But it's the goal of the church, it's the job of the church to follow the mission of Jesus. And it can be simply boiled down to the cliche, yet it's cliche because it's true. You love, God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourselves.
Right.
Well, some of us are really good at the loving God part, but not the equally as important second half, loving your neighbor as yourselves. So within this church, the history of Good Shepherd, I even remember back in that day, we had missionaries in Madagascar and really and it was fascinating looking at the ways at which Good Shepherd was being an ambassador for God on behalf of the world in different areas. And I think that's only deepened because social justice and missions has been a strong pillar of Good Shepherd for as long as I can remember. And it's something that we always need to be mindful of to not get in the way of in terms of our personal barriers that we experience when we hear a word like social justice or a phrase like social justice.
Right.
Well, it's the justice of God.
Yeah.
Caring for the orphan, for the widow, for those in need, those marginalized. That's what we need to be doing.
Yeah, because I think one of the things that's always important in a conversation around any sort of impact and missions work is we talked about the 2000s as hope in the age of fear. We're talking about serving a population that has always needed hope, no matter what the decade was. It's too often lived in fear, right? Mm-hmm. No matter what the cultural responses were. And I think, dear listener, you hear me say this all the time, a church like ours has the resources where therefore we have a responsibility to do that work in a highly ethical and highly responsible and highly in a high way. Mm-hmm. Where I want to kind of begin to land the plane here. So one of the things that I think is important in any of this conversation around looking back is we do some of what you've already described here, which is we take the time to examine our own story within the context of this.
Sure. And
there's something I'm always really mindful of when I look back at the difference between nostalgia. Mm-hmm. Man, God, it was so great when you and I got to spend all that time together in the mornings back before I had children and was getting a theater degree at a pretty good engineering school.
Yeah.
And my girlfriend, now wife at the time, went to a different school. Like, weirdly enough, that amount of responsibility.
But you still look the same.
But exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you for noticing. That's nostalgia. Mm-hmm. And that's not very helpful. But there is a benefit to seeing God's faithfulness.
Yep.
Biblical example of Ebenezer stones.
Yeah.
How do you, as someone who your location hasn't really changed?
Yeah.
How do you navigate that for yourself?
It's so important because I personally am one for nostalgia.
Sure.
Like I am a nostalgia junkie. My family has a lake house in the Ozarks, and there used to be this thing on the side of the road, this strip mall called Nostalgiaville.
That's hilarious.
That's literally what it was. And I was too young to like force my parents to stop at it or whatever. But just, I love nostalgia. Now here's where the difference comes into play. When you bring up Ebenezer stones, somebody might be like, well, what is an Ebenezer stone?
Yep.
In the Old Testament, there's so many stories of ways in which God moves, whether it's through protection, whether it's through provision within battles or whatever it might be. The Israelites would build these altars, these stones, basically stacks of stones, and they would leave them there as kind of a memorial, a remembrance of the way God in which God moved in that moment. And so they'd go about where their lives and whatever, and whenever they would come back to that stone, those stones, they would be reminded of God's faithfulness. Well, that's the importance of what we're trying to do here, where we're not trying to say, oh, those were the good old days. Because actually the best days, I truly believe, are now and ahead of us.
Yeah.
Because that's the way God moves. It's not like God only did great things in the 80s or 90s during our personal heydays.
Right.
God is a God of yesterday, today, and forever. So the heart of this isn't to do a good old days mentality. It's to say, hey, do you remember how God has moved in big ways in the past? Well, if we believe that God moved in those ways then, how much more can we expect and hope that God is going to continue to move in the future?
Yeah.
So open your eyes, find those moments, remember those moments, and look for those moments to come.
Yeah. Being fueled by what's happened in the past. I think about this all the time because I'm someone who, I would use the language, I became a Christ follower on Christmas Eve, 2011. And I had a very like before and after moment. I was asking some questions. I was starting to read the Bible, but like I had a very personal transformational experience. And I've worked at a church long enough to go, oh, there were some people who helped make that Christmas Eve happen who were real tired, real burnt out.
Come on, preach.
Right? And really just excited for everyone to get out of the building so they could go home. Right. And yet, what that was an example for me was a time where God showed up in a way. I mean, in my case, literally an Ingrid Michaelson song was playing. Like God showed up in an unexpected way.
Yeah.
And I can look at that and make this story about him. And that allows me to move forward.
Yeah.
If I zoom out too much to some of those people, I go, oh, like, did I just, have the right meal, or, was I just the right amount of tired or whatever? Right.
Yeah.
And I think for us personally, one of the things that I appreciate so much about you as a leader is whenever you're doing that nostalgia about this place, it is always rooted in the celebrating the people who were there and how so many of those people are still here.
Yeah.
Rather than going, man, things were better then than they are now. Because I see how you are building, in some cases quite literally, the thing you will be nostalgic about 20 years from now.
Yeah. So I stand on the shoulders of some amazing people that came before me. Paul Wood, Mike Ferguson, and thankfully I still get to work with Pastor Greg, but Glenn and Greg and Gary, I stand on their shoulders. That they invested in me in big, big ways. I look back, not out of nostalgia to them, but out of gratefulness for their presence in my life, God's gift of their presence in my life. My hope and prayer is that moving forward from here, 10, 20 years from now, the next person to do what I'm doing at Good Shepherd can say, Ryan was a blessing in my life and empowered me to help lead this church to where God is still leading it and still moving, because God is still leading and still moving. My question to you, Ross,
here we go.
Flip the script. Music plays a big piece in these decades, right? Because we can kind of look back and oh man, this is a classic. Going back to the beginning, 2011 for you, what are some of the do you remember any of the worship songs that you were first exposed to that you were like, whoa?
No,
because you're not musical.
Yeah. If this makes the podcast, I love how we could see you beginning to realize where this answer was going to go as you were getting to the end of the question.
I was like, oh.
No, it is a ironic part about my faith. God has surrounded me, present company very much included, with incredibly gifted musicians and folks who use their gifts to lead worship in that way. And that's been true since 2010. I tried carrying a tune in a bucket once and I tripped. I am not someone who can do that well. And therefore I listen to comedy the way that hipsters listen to music.
Cool.
No, actually.
No, not cool.
No, actually less useful.
A lot.
But as an example, the song that I was hearing is Winter Song from Ingrid Michaelson.
Yeah.
And it was the chorus of it is just asking this question, is love alive, is love alive, is love alive, right? And how God took that was getting me to realize that as I was beginning to experience an actual relationship with him, I was still doing so on my terms. I was still dictating when he could show up and when he couldn't. I wrote a sketch once, which was I'm available. And it was someone proclaiming to God how they were available to be used by him. And then the window that they got to be used by him was getting slower and slower and slower. By the end of the sketch, it was once a month for about 10 minutes. Right. And that was based off of personal experience. that's my attempt at answering your music question, because the real answer is no. I have no frame of reference of that.
Well, but even you remembering "Is Love Alive," "Is Love Alive," "Is Love Alive," I think speaks to, I truly believe, whether somebody considers themselves musical or not, the Psalms is a huge book of poetry and song. So I believe it's something that God has ingrained in humanity.
100%.
So when we look back over the decades, when it comes to worship music and the evolvement of worship expression, there are the worship wars. Oh my gosh, you can't bring a guitar into a sanctuary. That's blasphemous. And
when was that happening?
Thankfully, before I brought a guitar into a sanctuary, someone had blazed the trail before me. And then it was drums. You can't do that. And here's the deal. Folks. In my core belief, to say that there is only one expression of worship that is more worshipful than others and that others aren't is equally as blasphemous as anything I think we can say.
100%.
If we believe that God is the creator of all things, it says in the book of Job that the morning stars sang at creation. So we're even going back to the very, very beginning of music being a thread through so much of God's story.
Thank you for listening to the Encounter Faith podcast. This podcast is a service of G. Shep Productions from Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in Naperville, Illinois. All rights reserved. If you're in the area, we'd love to meet you on a Sunday morning at our 9 a.m. or 10:45 services. At Good Shepherd, we are inviting everyone to walk together in the calling of Christ for a life of eternal impact. This podcast is produced and hosted by me, Ross Cochran, and our theme song is Wake the Earth by 1111 Worship. Thank you for listening. We'll talk again soon.